Welcome. I am Paul. I work at Botanical Gardens. I've been here for 30 years. And my interest is very much with trees, plants, and the environment. I was asked to put this in context, so I'm just going to try and give a very wide picture of water and the bioregion. So we jump straight in. I put the first slide just to sort of like, what is water? I think it's always interesting just to go back to things that we know, perhaps. But without water, there's nothing other than mineral forms. Water is basically the solution for all life. So if we are made up of water, life started in water, water is basically the medium within which chemical reactions can occur. So it's totally essential to life. Without water, there would be no life on this planet. And therefore, the natural world that we see around us is the expression of the environment. So that's saying it's the climate, it's the soil. So when we look at the natural world, when we observe the natural world, what we're doing is reading the landscape or understanding where we are. And I think whenever we're talking about water or something like that, it's very, very important to know where we are, because each location will have a very different situation. And water is this resource that we manage. It's a renewable resource. I'll probably say that 3 times. But it means that it is constantly turning in a cycle, and it renews itself if we manage it properly. And it is limited, but it can renew itself. So pushing buttons is good. This is the water cycle. This is the renewable situation that goes round and round. You have water, it evaporates, it condenses in the clouds, it rains, it comes back down. It's a very simple cycle. Some of it infiltrates into the ground, becomes groundwater. Some of it runs off the surface or comes through the ground and becomes surface water, exposed water. The important thing that needs to be said is that climate change is a happening phenomena. It's not going to not happen. So we should also be very aware of climate change, and that the increasing levels of CO2 and other molecules in the atmosphere are going to change the climate of India. No one is certain what is going to happen. People have made predictions. People say there will be less rainfall. Some people say the monsoons will get stronger to a certain point. It's unclear what will happen, but we should always bear in mind that it's going to change and it will eventually affect our water cycle. But having said that, even though the world is going to change, and we should recognize that the world is going to change, still for me, the base point when understanding water is to know where we are in the environment we are in at the present moment. And this, for me, is an idea of where we are. It's the bioregion. We could have talked about the larger India. We could have talked about the monsoons that come across in Kerala, but I thought for this particular talk, it's good just to be very aware of the bioregion. We know that Auroville is here, and north of us we have Auroville Lake. Some of us will have been there, some of us may not have been there, but it's a very large seasonal water body. And it is surrounded by little remnants of vegetation. We have the Puttapet Sacred Grove here. We have 3 reserve forests that are looked after by the Forest Department. But other than that, there are still a few little remnants here and there, but very much of the local vegetation has been removed. So if we want to learn about the environment, if we want to study the environment, there's not much in this degraded area that we can actually say is the original vegetation. However, it is there, and it will give us clues as to what's happening. This is the watershed of Auroville. Again, Auroville is down here at this point. All of this water flows into this water body, which then flows out to the sea, north of Marikkanam. So it's a very extensive water network. It's not a river, So that in other parts of India, you will have rivers that form your watershed, but ours forms around Auroville. And the fact that we have a large holding pond here may be a good thing. It may be one of those things that is helping us with the water table. It may not, because again, we're not 100% sure of how our water tables work, but it is a huge asset, as are all of these surface tanks, because they're where the water, when it rains in our heavy monsoons, that's where the water sits and eventually percolates into our water tables. Another two little slides, just again to keep the Auroville watershed in perspective. One is a satellite image, and this one is just showing you where the elevations are. So this is the Auroville plateau, slightly raised at about 60 meters up. This we can assume is around sea level, and you can see that the basin of Auroville is really surrounded by raised lands. So the water is flowing in this direction. This river here is the other side of the watershed. So these waters flow south of Pondicherry and out through First River, and then you have Second River. So you've got these different watersheds in the Pondicherry region. Very quickly, because I know this slide is coming again, but just to say, under the ground, lots and lots of things happen. It's not only surface water. We have different layers under the ground, which are also affecting our aquifers. So it's important to recognize that we have different substrates. When the water percolates, it moves, and generally it moves towards the sea from inland. So that's the bioregion in a geographical, environmental sense. And this is a slide which shows you where we could have possible sources of environmental degradation, which will then affect our water. There's industrial zones, Callipet, Cedarapet. There are towns, Tindivanam, Milam. And then we have other things where we do have, like wonderful assets, which is the birds of Auroville, but we also have this coastal erosion that is happening. So there's different challenges that are facing us in terms of our water. And if we just go through this, there is the overexploitation of water resource, which we'll touch in a minute. The degradation of surface water structures means that the tanking system that we looked at in the watershed is not looked after as it used to be. So it silts up, which reduces its ability to hold water and to percolate water. The canals and channels between the columns become overgrown, and that also affects the way that these tanking systems work. There is erosion because the vegetation has been removed, and in many places in our region, particularly around Auroville, we have this very sandy soil which then washes away in the monsoons and creates the canyons. And then we have all of these other sources of pollution, wastewater, solid waste, major infrastructure developments, and when it comes down to the bottom, the plant species are being removed. A few little just statistics to put things in context. We're in a climate that is semi-arid. We have a rainfall which is basically happening for 3 months of the year. 9 months of the year, your potential evaporated transpiration is greater than your rainfall. So it means more water is leaving than is actually arriving. So we have 3 months of monsoon when the waters are coming. The rest of the time, water is leaving our systems. We have around 1,300 millimeters of rain per year. And the aquifers that we must be talking about in the next sample are definitely going down. So this shows you the number of bore wells in the Pondicherry area since the 1950s. And you can see there's a dramatic increase in the number of bore wells in the area, which is exploiting our groundwater situation. So then I come back to the point of learning from the landscape. What can it teach us? What can we understand from looking at the landscape? And one of the things we can look at is the vegetation. The most obvious one for me, the one thing that I'm very passionate about and spend a lot of my time working on. The area which is covered with the tropical dry evergreen forest, which is the native forest cover of this area, is quite clear. It's a very coastal species. It's an evergreen forest, which has enormous benefits for the environment. The most simple one to understand is the shade. If the ground is shaded, the ambient ground temperature doesn't increase as much as it does when it's not shaded. You can have other types of forests, deciduous forests, where the leaves will fall off in the summer and consequently the ground temperatures will increase much more. So the key asset of the vegetation that we have is this extraordinary evergreen. And it's telling us something, and so is David. It's telling us something about the environment within which we live. My understanding is that it's telling us we live in an erratic rainfall area. It means we can't predict when the rains are coming. If we could predict when the rains are coming, the trees would shed their leaves because it's far more efficient for them in terms of being deciduous, in terms of their water conservation. But because it's an erratic rainfall pattern, sometimes comes in the summer, sometimes doesn't, the vegetation is adapted to that. It responds. So if it rains, the plants put on new leaves. If it doesn't rain, they sit and wait. So this is telling us that it's an erratic rainfall area. We can use this, and that's this is one of the things we can see around us and we can learn from it. And if we use these plants in our landscaping, we can work with plants that understand the environment here. So in any terms of a strategy, these plants have the wisdom of the area. They know how to survive cyclones, they know how to survive the normal droughts. If climate change comes, this is a good base point to work from, to observe this vegetation and see how it's changing. And then we can adapt our environment, but it's a fantastic base point to work from. The other thing that we can learn is to observe the culture that exists in this area. I think it's very important that Auroville recognizes where it is. It's in the bioregion, which means the environment, but this means the wisdom, the traditional wisdom that has evolved over centuries. In the same way that vegetation has adapted to the climate, so have cultures. And these cultures evolved before we had bore wells. And so they're teaching us things like surface water is an extraordinary resource if we manage it well and carefully. That's Calavelli tank, and this is a traditional system of moving water from one level to another, but it's all surface water, apart from this one, which is a open well. Also, the cultural context, in the Tamil culture, they have festivals. And those festivals are often telling us something about the climate. Pongal happens at harvest time, which is telling us that's the time we finish our harvest. Tamil New Year comes in April. And it's a little bug of mine that when we talk about water, we talk about it from the 1st of January. Was it a good year or not? I believe we should be talking about it within the context of the Tamil calendar. That's the beginning of the year. That's how we should start to understand our water resources. So it's important to be aware of the local culture as well as the local vegetation when we're trying to understand our situation in Auroville and how it refers to water. These are the points I've tried to make. Our water resources are limited, but it's a renewable resource that we can manage, and that's what people will talk about. We need to understand our local environment, to understand how we can manage our local water resources. And we can combine clues and hints from what we learn to help us to evolve along with new technological innovations to arrive at solutions. And the last one says, the more energy we require to sustain ourselves means how less the sustainable the solutions are that we have arrived at. So if we're using lots and lots of energy to solve our problems, we're not in a sustainable situation, particularly as we move into the era where climate change is going to affect each and every day of our lives. Thank you.